Imagine your sister is murdered, and the man responsible becomes a Hall of Famer. That's exactly what happened. And WWE? They've spent decades making sure no one remembers. This is Jimmy Superfly Snuka, one of the biggest names in WWF during the early 1980s. His career had the potential to stand alongside the greatest in history, but behind the fame, a dark secret followed him. In January 1983, at a hotel in New York, people heard screaming and saw Jimmy Snuka attacking a woman. That same night, that woman called her sister, crying and begging for help. When the cops arrived, they found Snuka dragging that woman by the hair, slamming her into walls. He fought off the cops like he had super strength. And what's even crazier, even when they sent in the dogs, he kept swinging. They eventually took him down and charged him with assault and harassment. By the next morning, however, the woman drops the charges, and just like that, Snuka walked free. That woman would happen to be Nancy Argentino, his girlfriend. This wasn't a random outburst.
Oh my god!
Snuka had a pattern: drugs, drinking, violence. Each time, charges vanished. Some say it was because of who he was and who he worked for. This hotel brawl only added to the suspicion surrounding Nancy Argentino's death. But that wasn't the end. 4 months later, it happened again. This time for the last time. On the night of May 10th, 1983, around 9 p.m., Jimmy Snuka came back to the lodge where he and Nancy Argentino were staying. As soon as he walked in, she was gasping, foaming at the mouth. Snuka called for an ambulance and paramedics rushed her to Allentown Sacred Heart Hospital. But what happened? Snuka told the cops she was acting strange, mumbling, disoriented, but that she seemed fine when he left her. But this wasn't just about some wrestler and his girlfriend. This was about Vince McMahon's next big star. Snuka was Vince's wild man, the face of Worldwide Wrestling Federation's unhinged spectacle. And WrestleMania was right around the corner. Despite their efforts, Nancy never regained consciousness. The situation took a tragic turn when she was pronounced dead at 1:50 a.m. on May 11th, 1983. Her death wasn't just another unfortunate accident. It became the center of controversy. And soon, Snuka found himself entangled in a legal battle that would follow him for decades. The biggest question that still lingers: why did Vince McMahon need to cover this up? At first glance, Snuka's involvement didn't seem obvious. He was the one who called 911. He appeared distressed, so why was there a need for secrecy? Reports suggest that McMahon intervened early, allegedly meeting with investigators. Some believe he used his influence to make the case disappear, but why would he do that? Because Snuka wasn't just any wrestler, he was money. But the real question is, who was Nancy Argentino, and how did she end up tangled in Jimmy Snuka's demonic world? Nancy Argentino was a 23-year-old Brooklyn girl who got caught up in the wild world of pro wrestling when she started dating Jimmy Snuka in the early 80s. But there was one big problem. Snuka was already married with kids. Their relationship was a mess from the start, but Nancy stuck around, following him on tour and handling his travel plans, being his right-hand woman. Behind the flashy wrestling life though, things were bad. Their relationship, a total dumpster fire. Screaming matches, sketchy bruises, and a whole lot of, "this doesn't look right." Her friends saw it, her family saw it, but no one thought it would end with a body on the floor, which I'll tell you about next. So Nancy met Snuka through her friend Ellen, whose fiancé was a wrestler. Snuka took an interest in Nancy, and despite her family trying to welcome him, he barely spoke to anyone. At dinner, Nancy's sister Louise made a joke. Snuka grabbed her by the throat and whispered, "I could." But that's not even the crazy part. Listen to this. Snuka tried to smooth things over by offering her cocaine. He straight up offers her some blow like that's a bouquet of flowers. In the years of their relationship, Nancy and Snuka partied hard, drinking, doing coke. His manager Buddy Rogers wanted nothing to do with him after seeing how bad the drugs messed him up. Since no one else wanted to deal with him, Nancy took over. Even Vince McMahon had to step in to keep Snuka from completely losing it. Soon, her close ones began to notice that Nancy had changed. She wasn't the same lively, smiling girl she used to be. She became quieter, more withdrawn, and everyone saw it was because of Snuka. The truth about Nancy's death wasn't just some rumor. It was hiding in plain sight, in the grand jury presentment. What came next changed the whole case. On May 10th, 1983, investigators laid everything out. Police reports, witness testimonies, hospital records, and most importantly, Jimmy Snuka's story. First, she slipped and hit her head.
So what had happened? She fell?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, banged her head and,
Then, she hit her head while peeing on the side of the road. But there's more. In another story, he said they were just playing around and she hit her head by accident. Okay, sounds plausible, but actually there was one more story. In a third version, he straight up admitted to pushing her, which made her fall and hit her head on concrete. And even with these stories, the hospital staff were told something else. That Snuka told them he had hit her. That's more than 3 versions. One man, one dead woman. All these stories were different from each other. The lies and confusion made police and the jury suspicious. Something didn't add up. And when Vince McMahon entered the picture, the whispers of a cover-up got louder, and Jimmy wasn't an angel, as you would probably already guessed. But what would bring him to this tipping point? The 1980s wrestling world was chaos. Booze, blow, women, and non-stop travel. And Jimmy Snuka? Jimmy Snuka's life outside the ring was a mess of bad choices, including a serious drug problem. Like many wrestlers from his time, he used them to numb the pain. But the more he used, the more his addiction made things worse, ruining his relationships, hurting his performance in the ring. And the legal trouble? That was just the beginning. Years of head trauma and drug abuse left him unstable. Some experts would later suggest brain damage, maybe even CTE. It would become a key argument in why he couldn't stand trial. But the violence didn't start overnight. Snuka lashed out at the people closest to him. Witnesses, including family, called him abusive. Not just to Nancy, but to his wife, Sharon. Debbie Rogers, the wife of his former manager, documented everything. Bruises, photos, notes. And Snuka? He always had an excuse.
Banged her head and,
But the truth was harder to deny. Over time, the damage spoke for itself. Many believe Snuka's actions weren't isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of abuse that should have been stopped. Snuka told different stories. Maybe Nancy did hit her head. But once you see the evidence, that theory falls apart. Initially, it was claimed Nancy hit her head on concrete, an injury that should have caused only a bruise. But what if there was more? When the pathologist took a look at Nancy's body, he said this: "This case should be investigated as a homicide until proven otherwise." Nancy Argentino's autopsy became one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in the decades-long investigation into her death, and by extension, Jimmy Snuka's legacy. Conducted in 1983, over 24 injuries, head, face, arms, legs, cuts, bruises, you name it. Not a scratch from falling, more like she went 10 rounds with a heavyweight. And the forensic pathologist, Isidore Mihalakis, didn't hold back. The report noted that her injuries were consistent with a moving head hitting a stationary object multiple times, a red flag for potential abuse. It also mentioned signs of mate abuse, a term for domestic violence or sexual abuse. There was no dirt on her clothes, no torn fabric, nothing to suggest she had fallen near a truck stop, as Snuka claimed. And this wasn't just speculation. These were the conclusions of a forensic pathologist after a full autopsy. So if everyone had a reason to stay quiet, Snuka, Vince, the cops, even the witnesses, then maybe the scariest part isn't what happened to Nancy, It's how easy it was to let her story die. Then comes Vince, the guy who built his empire on Snuka's back and wasn't about to let him go down. Back in 1983, when Nancy Argentino's death was being investigated, McMahon showed up to a meeting with prosecutors and cops. He did most of the talking, while Snuka barely said a word. Assistant DA Robert Steinberg later recalled that McMahon did all the talking, taking control of the conversation with his signature showmanship. The case faded into silence. The grand jury also reviewed past incidents of violence. Despite overwhelming evidence, no charges were filed at the time. After that, the case just disappeared. But the weird thing was that McMahon brought a briefcase with him. No one knows what was inside, but people started whispering about a cover-up.
It's a cover-up.
He brushed it off, saying it was just a normal meeting, but people weren't buying it. When the case came up again later, McMahon was still running the show, repeating that nothing serious happened. One lawyer even remembered him saying, "I'm in the garbage business," like scandals didn't bother him. Even though medical reports clearly pointed to foul play, prosecutors claimed they didn't have enough solid evidence. Assistant DA Robert Steinberg later stated that the case simply couldn't be put together. Dr. Isidore Mihalakis couldn't provide the definitive proof needed. Snuka waited between 12 and 24 hours before seeking medical help. By the time emergency responders arrived, there was nothing they could do to save her. The whole thing smelled fishy, conflicting stories, missing details, and way too much outside influence. In the end, it looked like someone pulled some strings, and justice for Nancy never came. His history of violence didn't end with Nancy. 5 months after her death, Snuka allegedly hospitalized his wife Sharon after a brutal assault. Nancy's family never stopped pushing for answers. In 1983, they hired New York attorney Richard Cushing to re-examine everything. He spent weeks in Allentown, Pennsylvania, investigating the scene, reviewing reports, and speaking with witnesses. His conclusion was clear: there was enough to bring the case before a grand jury for murder. But District Attorney William Platt refused to move forward. Cushing faced constant roadblocks, making it clear the case wasn't going anywhere. The evidence was there: the injuries, the delays, the inconsistencies. But instead of justice, the case was buried. Their efforts led to Snuka's indictment in 2015, 32 years after her death.
WWE star Jimmy Snuka made a name with his flashy moves in the wrestling ring, but tonight he's out on bond in New Jersey accused of killing his girlfriend 3 decades ago.
By then, he claimed to suffer from dementia and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, with his defense arguing he wasn't competent to stand trial. Prosecutors countered, presenting evidence of Snuka attending public events and even participating in a 2015 wrestling match. The legal battle dragged on, but in January 2017, the case was dismissed. Snuka was deemed unfit for trial due to his deteriorating health.
Wrestler Jimmy Superfly Snuka has passed away.
Wrestling icon Jimmy Superfly Snuka has died.
He died 12 days later, taking whatever truth remained with him. The tragic death of Nancy Argentino wasn't just a mystery, it was a cover-up. One that exposed the rot behind the glamour of pro wrestling. Jimmy Snuka got to live out his career. Nancy didn't get to live out her life. And Vince McMahon? He walked out of this mess with his star. No charges, no consequences. Just business. But if you want to see a story where Vince didn't really get his way, click here. Thank you for watching, subscribe, or I'll steal your shoes.